AITA for keeping a family secret that could change my brother's life. You can't tell him. It'll destroy everything. Those were the exact words my mom said to me 5 years ago, and I've carried them like a weight on my chest ever since. But now, I'm starting to wonder if I've been protecting the wrong person this whole time. Let me start from the beginning. I 32M have a younger brother, Luke 29M. Growing up, we were close. Not just close, but inseparable. We were the kind of siblings who finished each other's sentences, pulled off ridiculous pranks together, and had each other's backs no matter what. Luke was always the golden boy, the one everyone adored. Straight A's, football star, the guy everyone thought would go far. I never resented him for it. Honestly, I was happy to see him thrive. If anything, I felt like I was his biggest cheerleader, even when my own achievements paled in comparison. That's just how it was. But things started to shift a few years ago when I came home for Thanksgiving. My parents were acting strange. They were whispering a lot, avoiding eye contact whenever Luke came into the room, and making these weird, loaded comments about how some things are better left in the past. I didn't think much of it at first. Every family has its quirks, right? Then, on the last night of my visit, my mom pulled me aside. She looked nervous, like she'd been holding something in for years, and it was finally about to burst. "There's something you need to know," she said. I thought she was going to tell me she and Dad were getting a divorce or something, but what she actually said left me completely stunned. She told me that Luke wasn't my full brother. He was my half-brother. Apparently, back before my parents were married, my mom had a brief relationship with another man, a man Luke had no idea existed. When she and my dad got together, she was already pregnant with Luke, but my dad decided to raise him as his own. They never told Luke the truth, and as far as he knew, we shared the same parents and the same DNA. I was floored. I mean, what do you even say to that? My mom begged me not to tell Luke. She said it would ruin the family dynamic, and that it didn't matter because my dad loved him like his own. She made me promise to keep it a secret, and in the heat of the moment, I agreed. But ever since that day, I've been carrying this massive burden. Every time I look at Luke, I feel this weird mix of guilt and sadness. He has no idea that the man he calls Dad isn't actually his biological father. And it's not just that. It's the fact that he idolizes our dad. He talks all the time about how he wants to be just like him, how proud he is to carry on the family name. And the thing is, Luke's been going through some major struggles lately. His career hasn't panned out the way he hoped, his marriage is on shaky ground, and he's been searching for some kind of deeper purpose. He's even mentioned wanting to do one of those ancestry DNA tests to connect with his roots. Every time he brings it up, I feel like I'm going to break out in hives. I've been holding on to this secret for years, convincing myself that it's not my place to tell him. But recently, something happened that's making me question everything. A few months ago, Luke called me out of the blue. He sounded more excited than I'd heard him in years. "Guess what?" he said. "I signed up for one of those ancestry DNA kits. Finally gonna figure out where we come from." My heart sank. I felt like the walls were closing in on me. I tried to play it cool, laughing awkwardly and saying, "Oh, that's cool, man. Can't wait to hear what you find." But inside, I was panicking. I knew the results weren't just going to show our Irish or German heritage. They were going to blow his whole world apart. For weeks, I lived in a constant state of anxiety, waiting for the inevitable phone call. Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach dropped. And then, it happened. Luke called me late one night, his voice shaking. "Something's wrong," he said. "The results came back, and they don't make any sense." He explained that the DNA test matched him with relatives he didn't recognize, people who were clearly connected to him but had no relation to our dad's side of the family. I tried to play dumb. "Weird," I said, forcing a laugh. "Maybe it's just a mistake." But Luke wasn't buying it. He told me he'd already reached out to one of the distant relatives on the site, and they confirmed something he hadn't even considered. That his biological father wasn't who he thought it was. At that moment, I felt like the world was crumbling around me. I wanted to tell him the truth, to finally get this weight off my chest, but I couldn't. I kept hearing my mom's voice in my head. "You can't tell him. It'll destroy everything." Instead, I mumbled something about how it was late and we should talk more in the morning. He agreed, but I could tell he was frustrated and confused. I barely slept that night, tossing and turning as I replayed the conversation in my head. The next day, I called my mom and told her what had happened. She freaked out, saying, "He can't find out. You have to convince him it's a mistake." But how could I do that when the evidence was right there in front of him? A few days later, Luke called again. This time, he was calmer, but more determined. He told me he was planning to dig deeper, maybe even hire a private investigator. He said he felt like a huge part of his identity had been ripped away and he needed answers. I tried to steer him away from it, suggesting that maybe he should focus on the family he does have instead of chasing something in the past. But he wouldn't budge. "I just want the truth," he said. Hearing those words hit me like a ton of bricks. The truth? That's all he wanted. And I was the one standing in the way. But here's the twist. While all of this was unfolding, I found out something else that added another layer of complexity. I was going through some old documents in my parents' attic when I stumbled across a letter addressed to my mom from a man I didn't recognize. In the letter, he mentioned wanting to meet Luke, but being afraid of how it might disrupt his life. The man's name was Richard, and based on the dates and details in the letter, it was clear. This was Luke's biological father. I was shocked. I didn't know what to do with this information. Should I tell Luke? Should I confront my mom? The letter was written over 20 years ago, and it seemed like Richard had respected my parents' wishes to stay away. But now that Luke was digging into his past, I couldn't help but wonder if Richard might still be out there, waiting for an opportunity to connect. The weight of the secret felt heavier than ever. On one hand, I didn't want to betray my parents' trust, but on the other hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that Luke deserved to know the truth. After days of agonizing over what to do, I decided to take the letter and confront my mom. I showed it to her and asked, "Why didn't you tell me about this?" She looked like she'd seen a ghost. She snatched the letter from my hands and said, "You had no right to go through our things." But I wasn't letting it go this time. "Mom, Luke is already suspicious. He's piecing it together on his own. Don't you think it's better if he hears it from us, instead of uncovering it himself?" She broke down crying and told me she'd always feared this day would come. She said she didn't tell Luke because she was scared of how it would change their relationship. "Your dad raised him as his own," she said. "What if he stops seeing him as his father? What if he hates me for lying?" I tried to reassure her, saying that Luke loved our dad and nothing could change that. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. Luke had always put our dad on a pedestal, and this revelation could shatter the perfect image he had of him. I left my parents' house more conflicted than ever. I wanted to protect them, but I also couldn't keep ignoring the guilt that was eating away at me. That night, Luke called me again, and this time, he sounded different. "I found something," he said. My heart stopped. "What do you mean?" He told me he'd been doing more digging and found someone online who claimed to know his biological father. "His name is Richard," Luke said. "Does that mean anything to you?" I felt like I was about to pass out. Richard, the name from the letter. The man my mom had tried so hard to keep out of Luke's life. And now Luke had found him on his own. At that moment, I knew I couldn't keep the secret any longer. I told Luke to come over so we could talk. When he arrived, I handed him the letter and told him everything. About my mom's past. About the secret she'd been keeping. And about how I'd known for years, but hadn't told him. Luke didn't say anything for a long time. He just stared at the letter, his hands shaking. Finally, he looked up at me and said, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I tried to explain that I was trying to protect him, that I didn't want to hurt him or our parents. But he just shook his head and said, "I had a right to know." The next few days were a whirlwind. Luke confronted my parents, and as expected, it didn't go well. My mom was devastated, and my dad tried to downplay the situation, saying it didn't change anything about their relationship. But for Luke, it changed everything. He ended up reaching out to Richard, who responded almost immediately. They've started talking, and from what Luke has told me, Richard seems like a decent guy. He never wanted to abandon Luke, but respected my mom's decision to keep him out of the picture. As for our family, things are strained. My mom is heartbroken. My dad is trying to pretend everything's fine, and Luke is still processing everything. He says he doesn't blame me, but I can tell he's hurt that I kept the secret for so long. I don't know if I did the right thing. I thought I was protecting everyone, but maybe I just made things worse. So, Reddit, AITA for keeping this family secret for years, even though it might have changed my brother's life. Thank you for watching. Tell us what you would do in this situation.